of our masterclass series on back pain and factors that influence back pain. And today we are talking about, so today's live will be about how posture can influence our pain and how posture can influence how we move. So bear with me 2 ticks while I just go and get the skeleton and we'll get to it. So having talked to a few people, or having had a few comments back from people, the big thing that seems to influence back pain for most people seems to be life. And you're probably not wrong in that at the moment. We all tend to be very busy, we all tend to have a lot going on, and certainly from, when we were not doing too much compared to when we're doing sport, compared to when we're then running around after kids, compared to when we're now having to find out where everyone wants us quickly now. There's no time to rest. We're pretty much on 24/7, so life does get in the way, but from my point of view, it really is a case of trying to work out what can influence it that you can have some control over. And posture's a big thing. Definitely when I was younger, and we're talking back in the 80s, being a sort of high school kid in the 80s, that posture was a little bit different back then. We weren't spending a lot of our time on games, on computers, on consoles, on mobile phones. Yes, we were still reading, yes, we were still doing things, however the actual setup of what we did was a little bit different. And certainly from a posture point of view, being able to sit back in a chair, being able to then work and move around and stand and stretch, and obviously going out to play, that seems to have taken a little bit of a backseat these days to kids being static at school, slumped in a chair at school, staying still because they're playing consoles and video games. Also, our lives have become a lot more sedentary. We don't actually do what we used to do when we moved. So posture plays a big role in how the body is moving, but also in how we stand, how we sit, and the influences that can have on our posture. So if I have my good posture, and I'm just going to move this down a little bit so hopefully you can see me a little bit further out. If I am standing in what I would call good posture, when I'm in the side view here, what should basically happen is my ear is in line with my shoulder, which is in line with my hips, which is in line with my knees, which is in line with my ankles, okay? And from a front view, my shoulders and my hips and my feet should relatively be in line. So, most of the time we sort of hang, or we're doing this, or we have posture that's comfortable for us, but it might not be 100% accurate for optimal posture. And when we're talking about optimal posture and neutral, so if we go back to our spine, the spine itself should have a bit of a lazy S shape. So when we're here and when we're loading through it, this is the optimum loading of the spine. Now, if we are in a curl back posture, which is what a lot of us tend to do today, we tend to slump, it means that we put extra pressure on the muscles and the tissues at the back, and we cause compression at the front. So not only from here are we in that rounded back posture, but also all the tissues at the front of our tummy, so our hip flexors and our abdominals, they are obviously compressed and they get shorter. Also, we're not getting the right expansion through our rib cage, so when we're taking a breath in, our diaphragm isn't going to move as well as it should do because it's got all the abdominal contents then to fight against. So the slump, sort of curled posture that most of us might adopt if we're sat and we're just rested, is not that great for the spine because it puts us into what we call flexion. So our lower back is actually stretched, and it puts our pelvis into what we call a posterior tilt, so it's rotated backwards. Okay. On top of that, if we're in a curly back here, the top half then becomes a C curve as well, so we curve forward, and again that brings our pecs tight. It means that our shoulders are very a little bit more strain, but also it then means that we've got a bit of a pokey chin moving forward. So from there we actually want to be out and upright, which means that our shorter hip flexors and our shorter abdominals need to work and need to stretch, but then also our back muscles, which have been on a stretch all the time, when we start trying to stand up straight, they actually might ache and they might hurt because they're fatigued. They're not used to working because they're used to being slumped. So the muscles at the back become overstretched. They're weaker because they're on that persistent curve, and then when we try and access them and try and stand up straight, they fatigue easily, and we get fatigued around here and we get fatigued around our lower back, and then that hurts. So if you're in that curly back posture all the time, you're going to have 2 or 3 things that will happen. With that posterior tilt here, your hamstrings will get tighter, especially if you spend a lot of time seated, which means that over time it's then harder for you to come up because you might lose that ability. So as your hamstrings pull your pelvis that way, your hip flexors are pulling your pelvis this way, your abdominals are getting shorter and your pecs are getting shorter. So again, the head becomes forward poked, and that can lead to headaches as well. So coming out of that posture into a proper posture might actually then become uncomfortable. What happens is what we call postural dysfunction, which basically means that over time, what our comfortable posture is, so when we're doing things and when we're moving and we're comfortable in our standard posture, that in itself then hurts, because what's happened is our posture is causing us pain and our posture is now causing a problem. So for those of you that are generally curly backed, or you know your kids are curly backed, you're going to end up with relatively tight hamstrings, relatively tight hip flexors, relatively tight abdominals because they're short, also lack of range through the diaphragm, lack of range through the ribs because you can't function in that curled position. Pecs are tight, necks are tight, the back of the neck's tight. When we try and move, it then hurts because the muscles get weaker. The muscles that are weaker are trying to work against muscles that are tight, and it all sort of falls apart unless you're doing the right thing. So it is feasible that you can change that. It's just a case that most of us then think, oh, our tummy's weak, so what we need to do is strengthen our tummy. And what you end up doing is strengthening things that are already tight and weak, which makes it then even harder for the back to accommodate and work against it. So you're trying to work to straighten up, but it's fighting muscles that are weaker and muscles that you're also trying to strengthen. So that in a nutshell is the curly back posture. Okay. The other posture that we see quite a lot is, especially in obviously girls or ladies who've had babies, is that the weight of the baby brings your pelvis forward, and we tend to then hinge. Okay, so obviously if you've got a belly that's taking and growing a baby, the weight of the baby is pulling you this way, and we just naturally counterbalance that. Okay, we'll also see that in people who have that naturally more of a pot belly, where they carry their weight in their abdomen. They're going to counterbalance to do that and bring it backwards. Now after babies, obviously you've had baby's gone, the weight is coming back to a more normal size, and if you have been overweight and you're losing weight, you'll then end up with a posture that you might think is what we call lordotic. So lordotic is where the body in the lower section becomes more extended. Okay, so your normal curve in your lower back becomes more exaggerated into extension. Okay, and that's what we call a lordotic curve. Now, the common thing that we see is that people have said, look, I've got a really hollow back, I've got a really poor posture in my back, I've got like my curve, I need to flatten it out. So what they're trying to do is curl and tuck under to take away that curve that they think is there in their back. So true lordosis is when your lumbar spine is in extension. So you have the whole of that lumbar spine here in an extended position. So that's what we'd call true lordosis. Okay, now if that's the case, yes, you would want to flatten that out a tiny way, which means that you're hyperextended, you just want to loosen it a little way, and in that hyperextension you're probably going to be crunching and squashing those vertebrae a little bit, and that's going to cause pain in your lower spine. So yes, if you have a true lordosis, you do want to flatter back. The problem is, what we see is that people think they've got a true lordosis, and what they actually have is just a hinge. So what's happened is their lower back is actually in a good position, it's in a good neutral position, but they hinge back. So a lordotic posture, if I can do one well, will be that I'm in a lot of extension here, where a hinge is literally you're bending from above. So the junction where your lumbar spine meets your thoracic spine, you're hinging back there. And then if you're correcting that by trying to tuck under, what you're actually doing is creating a flat or a flexed spine and a hinge back on top, which is again making the problem worse, because you're making your hip flexors shorter and you're making all the other things adapt, and tight hamstrings as well, which means you've lost, again, normal curve. So I think the biggest thing that, you know, if you do have issues with your spine and you do have issues and you think you have poor posture, or you've been told you have poor posture, is that when we see people, we say, well, if your posture's poor, what are you doing about it? What have you been told to do about it? And a lot of our clients will say, well, I've been told that I need to work on my posture, but they don't really understand why, and they don't understand what to do and exactly what they're trying to achieve. So in that hinge back position here, what needs to happen is we just need to bring the weight back normally. If you're correcting that position by tucking underneath, you're not solving the problem at all, you're just putting yourself into a different poor posture. And again, the other thing that tends to happen is, especially if you think that you don't stand up straight, is that people pull their shoulders back to stand up straight. And again, if I turn side on to you, if I'm standing up in a natural posture and I'm here and I want to stand up straight because this is my poor curly sort of kyphotic posture, as we would call it, if I stand up straight by doing this, then what I'm doing is still poking my head forwards, because all that's changed is my shoulder blades. I haven't actually done anything to change my posture, which then needs to be coming a little bit more upright. So working out where your posture is and then working out how to then change that posture is going to be key in how you can then manage your back or manage your pain moving forwards. With your kyphotic posture, so with your C curve posture, you're going to be overstretching these ligaments and overstretching the joints and overstretching the muscles, and the muscles are going to be weak. When you try and work them, you're going to be fighting against tight muscles here that need to be released and then strengthened, but then also the effort of doing that can cause pain as well. In the opposite section, where you're hinged and you're leaning backwards, we actually need to change your body weight, because in this position here, your weight's most likely in your toes, and if you try and stand up more, or you try and come up more, you're going to feel like you're falling backwards all the time. So there's a little bit of a weight shift that has to happen below, so that from that position here, we shift the hips backwards, so the torso and the upper back can then come forward on top, and then we stand up on top instead. And I think from our experience that really, you know, if we're talking about posture to people in general, a lot of people would agree that their posture's poor. A lot of people would agree that, you know, they need to have better posture, but they don't actually know what's wrong with their posture to be able to then fix their posture. And certainly from, you know, from our experience of what we see, is that people have just been told the wrong things. So we've seen lots of people trying to flatten a lordosis when it's not actually a lordosis, and what they're doing is creating a flat back, curly back posture with a hinge, and they're not lordotic at all. And this is why I think it's very important, if you are in back pain and you do have back pain, what tends to happen is we don't move. So when you first have back pain, the body wants to protect you. The body doesn't want you to move at all. And then what happens after that is your muscles start to get weaker and your body starts to get stiffer because you're not moving. And then when you start to move, you're very distrusting of movement because movement hurts. So, you know, we try to be very delicate and very robotic in how we move and very rigid. And then we reach that point where normal is rigid and normal is lack of flexibility. And then we get caught in that spiral of it hurts to move, so we don't move, and then we don't move, so it hurts. And then by the end of that, you will find that your posture's changed. You know, if you've got some pictures of yourself from when you are now sore to some pictures of yourself and your posture when you were pain-free, they might look quite different. They might be the same, and that's great. But if you do have pictures, that you might find that there is a definite difference in where your posture stands. A lot of people we find stand square and their posture hurts them on the right-hand side, so they move to the left. They might find that they've got a disc problem, so they lean away from that pain, and then over time those muscles change and the body adapts, and then we have a posture that's a little bit different again. So from a posture point of view, posture has a huge role in pain, and posture and how we adapt it and how we change it is basically a compensation. The body doesn't want you to feel pain, so the body will change how you move. It's the same as when people have a fracture in their leg or they break their leg, and then, you know, 2 years down the truck they've still got a limp. The leg doesn't hurt, the pain's not there, there's no fracture, but their body's accommodated to the limp, so they still have that slight limp that occurs, and they're not aware of it anymore. And that's the same thing with back pain. You know, we hurt, so we try and be rigid and we start to sit a little bit more. So instead of bending and picking things up and reaching and doing things up, we might be a little bit more deliberate and here, and we might take our time and we might move around, and all that's very well and good. But when we continue to do that, we will have postural adaptations and postural changes that then mean it makes it harder for us to move normally. And the aim after you've had pain is to move as normally as possible. I mean, our aim with everybody is that we can get you functioning back as normal as possible, that, you know, your joints move the way they should do, your body reacts the way it should do, that your hips and everything move independently. And what we tend to see is that as people get sore, when they're trying to move, if they're trying to move their leg and lift their leg, what they actually do is this. So if I'm standing straight on and I want to lift my, or I'm standing side on, if I want to move my leg and lift my leg up, what I might do is move my back to help me. If I want to do something where I'm bending down to pick something up and I'm bending this way, I might do it very, very delicately. And we also want to be able to move, and we might not hinder the hips, so we might get some support from something and then do it that way so it doesn't hurt. But all of those things can put added pressure and added strain and a change in biomechanics on the back. Okay? So, from our point of view, I think I've lost you somewhere. From our point of view, with our back pain and with our, just bear with me, because it says you're kind of here, but it also says I've lost you. There we go. So we did have a little bit of a whoopsie on my end. I obviously pressed something on the computer I shouldn't have pressed. So what I want you to basically get out of this is that you have a lot more control over your spine than you think. If you are standing every day and leaning backwards, there's going to be a lot of compressive forces on here which are going to make your back sore, and you might be trying to correct those by stretching this way. If you stand and you favour a leg, you're going to find that leg that you favour, that might be the spine and the side that's actually getting sore. And you know, if you keep getting better but then you keep going and leaning on it, it gets sore again. So our job is to actually get your weight distributed a little bit more evenly. If you stand and you've got a little bit of a twist, you're going to find that you're standing here but you've got a little bit of a rotation. This side is going to be working hard and this side is actually tight. So when you try and move, it's again stiffer. So again, it's our job to try and get those corrected, and that's what we do with our sort of rehab sessions, trying to get you to change and trying to get you to move. From your point of view, if you're not sure, an easy way from a posture point of view is very similar to yesterday. Take a picture front on, take a picture side on, take a picture back on, take a picture side on, okay? Have a look and see where your lines are. Do your shoulders sit outside your hips? Is one higher or lower than the other? Are your arm gaps different? Have you got an arm close to you and this arm further away? Do you have your head in line? Do you have your hips even? Does one side of your waist look longer than the other? And have a look at where your feet position is. From a side view, are you in a plumb line? Is your chest behind you and your hips in front? Or are your hips behind you and your chest in front? And that will start to give you an idea of where you're at. So a simple exercise for you today is I just want you to look down at your feet, have your feet about a fist's width apart, and you want your feet parallel, okay? All I want you to do is move side to side between your feet and try and feel where your body weight is, okay? Stop where you feel your body weight is about midway left and right. That's your center between both feet. Now what I want you to do now is rock your body weight forward and back between your toes and your heels. I want you to try and do it where it's a bit more just forward and back as opposed to you moving from the hips. So you're literally just rocking as if your feet are on a bit of a rocking chair. And then same thing again, you're going to stop where you feel that your weight is even between both feet. So now your weight's even left and right. Now your weight's even front and back. Now from here, we're just going to grow an inch taller. Imagine somebody's got a hair on your head and they're just going to grow and make you a tiny inch taller. When you do that, you should feel that there's a little bit of a tightening that happens up. I don't want you to suck in or grip anywhere. I just want you to notice that as you grow a little bit taller, keep the knees soft, there's a little bit of tightening that happens through the front of the abs. There might be a little bit of activity that starts to happen behind the thighs as well and behind the legs. And that is a good way for you to start to think about changing your posture. If you are in a posture that's this way, you don't want to correct it by sticking your bottom out here because that's going to make your back active. If you're in a posture that's this way, you don't want to correct it by pulling your shoulders back here because that's just going to fatigue you. And it's all got to start somewhere. We've got to work out whether, you know, your posture is changeable in a good way and you've got enough range to get there, or whether things are weaker and there's a muscle imbalance as well as muscles that are too tight that are not going to let you get there. Okay, so in our factors that influence back pain, day 2, it's all been about posture, and you know, the posture is going to be very key for people who just say, I don't know what's happened, just over time my spine has got worse, just over time I'm weaker than I was, and over time my back and my neck and my shoulders have just started hurting. And typically if posture is a problem, it will be something that gets worse as the day goes on. It will be something that gets worse towards the end of the working week, and it gets something that might change and you might not be as sore if you are then active and moving, because then your muscles are supporting you as opposed to prolonged static posture, which can cause pain. Okay, so hopefully that's helped a little bit more, and hopefully some light bulbs might have gone on as to how we look at posture. And to be honest, if you are going to get your posture looked at, just make sure that somebody's looking at you in a good way so that you actually understand which muscles are doing what, why they're doing what, where the weight is distributed in your feet. It's not just a case of saying you're a bit slumpy, you need to stand up straight. That's not going to cut it. Or, you know, you've got a hollow in your back, you need to tuck under to do it. That's not going to cut it. It should be something specific, like your muscles here are tight, we need to stretch them out. The muscles here are weak, we need to strengthen these. The muscles here are pulling you this way, we need to release them and strengthen these muscles up. It should be very specific for what you need. All right, thanks for your time today, guys. Thanks for listening to me, and we'll see you again tomorrow.